right, good morning. With the conference going on, there's a lot more here than I thought would be. That's good for us, maybe not so good for the conference, but so we're in the midst of our 4-week series on summer stories, testimonies of radical change. And I'm really excited to bring you today's, excuse me, because it has to do with one of Jesus' great miracles. And it has to do with the loaves and the fishes. And I don't know if you've really thought about this. I know I hadn't until I really started to meditate on it. That this miracle is different from all of the others that Jesus does. And we'll get into why that is in a minute. So if you want to turn with me, and we can look at John's version of this, and it's in chapter 6, verses 1 to 14. So I'll give you a second to look that up on your Bibles and your online tools. All right, so as we get there, my question for you is, whose miracle is this? Yeah, it sounds like a trick question, and it's really not. Well, yes, the miracle is Jesus' miracle. But what is different is that he involves other people in it. And he never does that with his healing or with any of the other miracles, at least that I can remember. But this one he involves people in. So that's what's really fascinating about that, and we'll dig into this as we go. So here it is. You have John lingers on the people who are standing close to Jesus, right? And we have Philip is involved, Andrew is involved, and then there's an unnamed boy involved. And these three people really gives us an opportunity to think about what our response is when we talk about what we bring to a potential miracle of Jesus. So the first focus point that I want to give you today, and there's only 2 of them, so you don't have to remember them, or struggle to remember them, is watch what's in front of you. Okay, so watch what's in front of you, right? And as we look at this, we'll see the difference between Philip and Andrew, especially. So let's open up and read this. So after Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, which is known as the Sea of Tiberias, that didn't last forever though, and a multitude followed him because they saw the signs which he did on those who were diseased. So clearly Jesus has been healing in the region of Galilee. The word is spreading. And Jesus went up on the mountain and sat there with his disciples. Can you imagine what the conversation would be between them? I don't have anything to offer, but wonder what they'd be asking, or what Jesus would be telling them after all this. Just something to ponder. And John makes a note here, and it's an important note because it plays into the crowd. Right now, the Passover, the Feast of the Jews, was at hand. So if you're familiar, when it comes to the Passover, people would all travel to Jerusalem. And that's why part of the reason we see such a large crowd is part of this miracle. So if you look at this map, it's a little bit hard to see. We've talked about when we talked about the woman the Samaritan woman, and how the Jews would avoid that. And what they would do is, I wonder if this has I didn't think of this till now, but if it had a pointer. Anyway, instead of taking this direct route through Samaria, they would go from Galilee through this ford and wind their way around, and would add an extra 10 miles onto their trip, which by foot is, significant. And that's kind of an important note. So Jesus is on this other side of Galilee, which we'll see in a second. And all these crowds are not going through Samaria, and they're coming around through this ford of the Jordan River. Okay, so we continue on. Lifting up his eyes, and then seeing that a multitude was coming to him, Jesus said to Philip, "How are we to buy bread so that these people may eat?" Now the question is, why Philip? Was Philip, just happened to be the one standing there? He could have asked any of them or all of them. But it's interesting because Philip is from Bethsaida, which is, which we'll show in a map in a second. But he is from this region in Galilee, so he's the local guy, right? So when Jesus asked Philip this, Philip knows, everything that goes on around here, including where they could get bread. And so in other words, he'd know where to find it. Okay, so this little map shows you this is the region where Philip's from. You have the hills behind where Jesus took his disciples. And then when the crowds come, they come down to this grassy plain. And what happens is, they travel from Capernaum over, Jesus and the disciples through the Sea of Galilee. It's only a 4-mile trip. But everyone else has to make this big arcing loop. So they've been walking a while. And, they're probably, coming to see Jesus, and they don't have the food that they're looking for. So when Philip answers this, he's thinking logistics because he's familiar with the area. And this is an important note for us. And the note is sometimes, and we'll get to this in a second, sometimes our familiarity with a situation kind of brings us to a state where maybe faith isn't their first response. So continuing on, this he said to test him, for he himself knew what he was going to do. This is, of course, Jesus. And Philip answered him, 200 denarii would not be enough bread for each of them to get a little bit. So that is about 2/3 of a year's wage for the common person. That's a lot. So Philip is calculating, right? He's thinking, well, there's nothing we can do here. So when we look at this, what we see is sometimes overfamiliarity breeds a dullness of heart, right? Local knowledge, honestly applied, runs straight into a wall for Philip, right? He's done the arithmetic, and he's just saying it's not going to work. And sometimes that can be the way we are, right? When we think, in terms of our church, right? We have, 35, 40 on a Sunday, and we've been discussing, what should we do next, right? And you think to yourself, and this is me, I've thought to myself, what can we do with just so few people? There's not much we can do. We're stretched so thin. Right? So this familiarity sometimes breeds this dullness of heart, and I've had that heart before. But Andrew's different. And this is how we got to think. We got to think like Andrew. And Andrew and none of the other disciples have any clue about the miraculous power of Jesus on a scale that we're about to see. But he still steps forward in faith. So one of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "Hey, there's a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are they among so many?" So Andrew is a little bit different than Philip. He's saying, well, we got this. In other words, what can we do with this? Jesus. And taking a step back, and so when we look at the two fish, they're kind of like sardines and they're not fresh, right? They've been pickled or they've been salted. And, so that there's no refrigeration, right? There's nowhere to have fresh fish. But I want to make note, too, of the 5 barley loaves. And what I'm about to offer here is not by way of certainty, but by way of suggestion. 5 in the Bible, as you look at things, and if you go back and look at the 5s in the Bible, it seems to point to grace. Right? There are 5 offerings. There are 5 smooth stones that David picks up in the brook. And so on and so forth. So when we step out in faith, when Andrew steps out in faith, he's saying, I'm going to step out in faith in the grace of my master, my rabbi. We'll get back to the number 5 in a little bit. So Andrew, unlike Philip, notes what's in front of him. I don't have the solution, he's thinking, but he notices this boy, and the boy, it makes you wonder, did the boy offer this up? It doesn't say. But it makes you wonder what the interaction between Andrew and this boy was. And he notices that I don't have much, but I'm going to offer it up anyway. And that's really important for us when it comes to stepping out in faith. Right? Sometimes we think when we're asked to do something, well, I'm not good at this. Or I only have this much to offer. Right? So I'm not going to offer anything because I'm not good at this. When Jesus is saying to us, I'm going to take what you have and multiply it. It's that step of faith that sometimes we walk away from. So asking that, what is in front of you and me? Are you disqualified from God's work because your resources look laughable? That's sometimes how we think of it, right? And bringing it back, I'm jumping ahead. So the question is never, do I have enough to accomplish this spiritual task? It's, am I watching what he's asking for, and will I offer it? 2 weeks ago, Eric spoke. And he was talking about sharing the gospel. And I think a lot of us feel like, I don't have enough to offer to do this, right? But if we step out in faith saying, this is what I'm going to bring, and I'm not going to get it right every time, eventually we're going to see this multiply. So, am I watching? Am I watching the opportunities that Jesus is bringing to me? And will I offer the little bit I have in order for this miracle to take place? So when we look at it as from what's in front of us as a congregation, are we disqualified from God's work because our resources look laughable? And the question should never be, is it enough? Do the little bit that we have as a congregation, is it enough? Or are we just going to offer what we have with the faith that Jesus will yield the increase? Okay, focus point number 2 in this whole scenario is that this ripple reaches much further than you and I can see. So let's continue on reading now, verse 10. Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down, in number about 5,000. So we hear this number about men, and we start to sometimes get into this controversy. Well, what about everyone else? What about the women and children? Why aren't we counting them? Because the number is what's important. It's not about, the men, women, and children. It's about this 5,000. If the number of 5 is grace, what's the number of God in the Bible? 1,000. A day with the Lord is 1,000 years, right? Take the grace of God, times it by 1,000, and he will yield the increase by 1,000, right? So 5,000. Again, this is just my suggestion. This is not necessarily dogma by any means. But would we expect, if we were standing there with these disciples, that we would be part of feeding this crowd of thousands, 10,000, whatever it really was? The answer should be now, given what we know, it should be yes. We can expect that because that's who Jesus is. It's not about, our faith. It's about our faith in knowing what Jesus is capable of and what our Father is capable of through him. So then Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. Oh, I forgot to say, the barley loaves is important too. So the barley is considered the poor man's bread, right? It's not something you'd want to be serving to guests. It's just what poor people would eat, right? It's the poorest of the meal offerings that we have in Leviticus. But when we offer that little bit that we think is not worth much, God can multiply it and feed a lot of people. And that ripple, which we'll talk about soon, goes on and on. And when they had eaten their fill, he told his disciples, "Gather up the fragments left over, that nothing may be lost." Right? Everything that Jesus is doing here, he's doing in order to bless people. And if there's leftovers, they're going to be used in some way or another, right? And we'll talk about the significance of that for them. So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten. So why 12 baskets? Anyone want to hazard a guess? One for each apostle, right? Right. And what are the baskets? The baskets are really, when we think of these, in our terms, we think, okay, there's these baskets we pick up. But they are actually little baskets that they carried with them in their travels. So these 12 baskets, are enough food for them to carry, each of them. What they did with that, I don't know. Maybe they ate it. Maybe they distributed it, in the coming days. It doesn't say, but what we can learn from it is that when we step out in faith, the abundance of God will not only be able to feed others through us, but may supply us with some food as well. And a continuing on of blessing others. So this ripple reaches further than you and I can see. One act, and it's many distances, right? So this one act feeds the 5,000. Do you think everybody in that crowd understood that Jesus had done this miracle? Maybe eventually, but not right away. And Jesus does this in abundance, right? Not just sufficiency. He does it so that it keeps going. Packed down, overflowing, right? We have that verse in, I think it's Micah, right? But the key is this: one yes in faith by Andrew and this young boy, and unknown numbers are blessed. And they ended up with more than what they started with. So when we look at the downstream benefits, when we step out in faith, right? You think about our church. How long has our church been here? Over 75 years, Faith? Something like that, right? It was started by Lukey's, Urbaniacs, right? And they're gone. Andrew Jarmola, I just got to know him for a couple years. But you know what? They're stepping out in faith and starting a church. And I don't know what it started out as, whether it's in homes or whatever. Their efforts continue on today. And you are being blessed because of their efforts. That's the ripple effect. And it's a ripple through time. Right? And we never know. There's a story, I'm trying to think who. It was a story that William Barclay told, and he doesn't offer it as for sure. What would you call it? A what? Fact. Yeah, it wasn't a fact, but this teacher would always start the session with his pupils by praying for them in a sense of what they may do in the future and honoring them in that way. And it turns out that one of those pupils was Charles Spurgeon, right? And so you never know, as a Sunday school teacher, you may be teaching somebody who goes on to do, some great things for the Lord. And you know what? You get credit for that. And people may come to you and say, you taught so-and-so in Sunday school, and thank you for doing that because you taught them. They brought me to the Lord. The ripple effect. But when it also comes to our church, what can we offer going forward with our 2 fish and 5 loaves? And what will it bring down through time? So the real lesson here is God stretches what we surrender. And this question lands on you and me. It's not, can Jesus do this? But will I be watching for when he asks for my 5 loaves? Will I be willing to take that step of faith, no matter how uncomfortable it is, when he asks me to serve and I think I've got nothing, or I've got just a little bit? When he's saying to Philip, I'm going to handle this, what's your response? And Andrew and the little boy go forth. It's Jesus' miracle. And Jesus chose to make room for it in others so that others could be part of that miracle. And I'm saying to you today, he still will do it. But you have to be on watch. And you have to be willing to go way beyond what you can offer. So don't just wait to be fed. Stay watchful. Your 5 loaves may be